Our guest, Phil Callaway, is a best-selling, award-winning author who uses humor to share the gospel and life's wisdoms. He's also a devoted husband and father of 3. His own life hasn't always been that rosy or funny. His mom passed away last year, and his wife is quite ill. So how does Phil manage to embrace God and humor through the trials and tribulations? He's here to share with us and discuss his book, I Used to Have Answers, Now I Have Kids. Phil, what a joy it is to be here today with you.
Great to be with you. Thank you, Christine.
Now, Phil, there are a lot of miserable people, a lot of very sad people indeed, who go through so much times of tribulation. How do you, as a person who's faced so much yourself, find that humor in life?
Christine, I think there are a number of things that hit me when I began to go through stuff that was very difficult. For instance, not just in my marriage, but realizing that my wife wasn't doing well health-wise when she began having seizures. And I started to get bitter. And I think a lot of viewers today would say, yeah, that's me. If we're really honest, we're starting to get bitter. And it took quite a period of time for me to come to a point of saying, you know what? I can become better or I can become bitter, because when we go through difficulties, we are offered a choice to turn one way or a choice to go another way. And in our case, what I've discovered is there is tremendous joy when we embrace God, when we say, you know what, I'm going to turn to you. I'm not going to keep looking at myself. We live in such a selfish culture. We've discovered how to spell we with 2 I's, those of you who have seen the game. That's how bad it is. But when we start to realize it's not all about me, it's about glorifying God. You know, I began to realize that my attitude makes an incredible amount of difference, that the world is full of cacti, but I don't need to sit on one, that I can determine my attitude. You know, the Apostle Paul told us to be joyful always. You know that verse. Yes. You know, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you who are in Christ Jesus. How do we do that? Well, we make a conscious decision to do it. And so as I began to do that, I started to realize, you know what, there's a sense of joy that's coming in. I've always had this ability to find the funny in the ordinary.
So you were born that way?
I was, and I was born into a very happy home, which helped a whole lot. My mom, you know, early memories of my dad were of him making me laugh. He had a comb over to die for, and would get away on him in a windstorm, and he was a lot of fun. And yet, you know, what's interesting is I realized all these years later that Dad was dealing with very serious things in his life. He was, you know, raised by crazy uncles in a home where the horrible things were commonplace, and yet he still was able to find joy. So certainly I can too.
There's something very interesting that you discuss that is so important, especially during economic downturns, and that is wealth without money.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
Yeah. One of my books is called Making Life Rich Without Any Money. And you know, as relates to this book, I used to have answers, now I have kids. We need to show our children that we live within our means. We don't spend more than we make. We are in this sad culture where debt has become commonplace. And I told people that getting into debt is a little bit like wetting the bed. It feels good for a very short period of time, and that's it. I mean, it is just, it is killing marriages. It is breaking up families. And so I want to offer that kind of advice to couples and just say, you know what, it's okay to not have the cool car. People are going to forget. They're not going to go home and say, wow, that guy's car is so amazing, and think about it for 3 days. They're going to forget. Envy is not admirable. So let's just live within our means, earn more than we make, and we'll be fine. Give money away, and it's a tremendous return that we'll receive. I have found that I've never yet encountered anyone who said, wow, I just outgave God. It doesn't happen. You know, give to others, think of others first, and it's amazing the results.
Well, children are a gift, and it's so important to understand they are truly one's wealth. But they come with a certain level of challenges, something you deal with great in your book. I mean, what a title. I used to have answers, now I have kids.
Yeah, I think so many of us are there when we look at our children. Younger people that are watching today would say, yeah, that's me. I used to have all the answers, and I was that way. I knew exactly what parents should do when children cried in church or whatever it was. I knew what they should do, and then I had children of my own and things began to change. change, you know. But this book talks about a whole lot of principles and does so in story form of things that we can do on a practical level. One of the things that in hindsight, Christine, that I discovered after writing this book was that just about every chapter involves prayer. So I was praying for my children all the way along, and God, you know, God answered those prayers, and He's going to do that. He's going to do that in the lives of our viewers as well.
Now, there are a couple things, in fact, all the way through. It's a funny book that you wrote, but there were a couple of things that really stood out. In one of those, it was the various voices that we hear in our head when we really are at a loss and at a wit's end. Yeah. You talk about your daughter when that day when she was pouring milk all over the floor and lost her halo. Now, the various voices that you described really cracked me up, okay? And parents are going to understand this and identify. Grandma, she needs more love. Social worker, whatever you do, don't spank. Grandpa, spank the tar out of her. Social worker, that encourages violence. And grandma, spank the social worker.
Yes.
So what voice did you listen to?
Rachel had been really, I mean, the perfect little child. I had boys, they weren't so perfect. 2 boys, and then Rachel came along, oh my goodness, she was just perfect. And suddenly one day she just lost it. We were sitting at the table and she was 2 and she just poured her milk out on the floor. I think she hung porridge from her little brother. And I looked at her and said, Rachel, you can't do that. What are you doing? We don't do that. We don't hang porridge from our little brother. And she looked at me and she said, we do. And I said, no, you obey Daddy. She said, no. She was 2 years of age. No. And some of us could take a lesson from 2-year-olds and say no a little more when it comes to our schedules. But there she was. Well, what would you do? And I took her out of her high chair and down the hall and I said, honey, obey Daddy. And she just looked me right in the eyes and she said, no. Wow, what do you do? So you know what? I listened to the voice of my mother, which would have been, if I had done something like that, there would be a little painful reprieve for me. And so I took a little blue spoon and I swatted her on the behind, hard enough where she knew, hey. But I looked at her and I knew she would be healed. And she looked at me and I said, you obey? She said, no. What would you do? So I held her and I spanked her, and then the tears started to come down my face. So I was thinking of this little girl. Oh God, please. I was praying all the while. Our son was on a Just Say Yes campaign going up and down outside in the hallway. Just say yes, Rachel. And here she was, defiant until she saw those tears. And she looked at me, she said, Daddy, I obey. And that day was really transforming in our lives. I mean, just a 2-year-old, but here she was. She followed me around all that day. We hung out together. I went and played hockey that night, scored a few goals. I was thrilled. But more than that, I was thrilled with how I came home, went to tuck my daughter into bed, pray over her like I did just about every night. The Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make His face to shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. The Lord lift up His countenance upon thee and give thee peace. And as I did that, she woke up, she looked up at me and she lifted her hands, and I picked her up and took her out to the living room onto the sofa and just fell asleep. She fell asleep with me singing to her, which is a miracle actually, to think of my singing giving anyone peace, but she did. And you know what, today, Christine, she works for me. She is my, she still calls me Daddy. She's 22.
Now, you are a sensitive dad, a very involved dad. There are people that are watching that need that encouragement to become an involved dad. What will you tell them?
I would tell them to focus on the right words in life. And so much of our culture is fractured. So much of our culture is teaching men today that they've got to chase stuff. The stuff of earth is what's going to do it. And what that does is it drives us away from relationships. And so the word I would like them to center in on today is a simple word called together. Just together. We can do this together. Ramona and I travel together, as you know, because I have known for years that you know, I don't need to have a window seat every time. I'm happy to give up that if I can have companionship. And so I'll travel.
But the window seat is really nice.
It is nice. I can look, you know, I can look past her. But I want to do this together, whatever it is. And so, you know, men today, I have defined success for men as being GUYS guys, genuine, understanding, yielded, and successful. And it's when we are genuine, we're the real deal, filled with grace, when we're understanding of our children, because God will give us understanding as we pray.